Current software engineers have no deep knowledge. This is a video by a guy called Jonathan Blow. I thought it would be interesting for me to cover this because I don't have an academic background in software engineering. I've only got the experience from the job that I'm currently in as a C-sharp full stack biotech desktop developer. And also, before I was in this, I was in construction and I had engineering modules and worked with civil engineers as a quantity surveyor. So let's jump right in.
I think there's a pretty serious problem that started happening in programming culture. I mean, it's been in programming for as long as I've been in, and this is beyond games even. This is everywhere.
Yeah. Oh my god, the guy breathing is insane. How is this? There's just a dude fully ASMR. Maybe I should have the title of this video, Software Engineers Have No Deep Knowledge ASMR. Appeals to a slightly different audience.
People don't have a clear picture of what knowledge is deep versus what knowledge is shallow, right? So if you go to school and you're a good student and you learn the difference between n log n and n squared, right? That's deep knowledge that will apply in many cases, and it's something fundamental about computers, right?
So I did A-level computer science, so I've scratched the surface of what we're talking about here, but I'm interested to see what point he's trying to make, because this is quite a broad assumption he's making here that computer science fundamentals are going to somehow apply in all realms of software engineering.
Right. On the other hand, if you go on Hacker News and read an article about somebody learning a specific JavaScript API and tutorializing it, right? That's very shallow knowledge because it's just you're learning about arbitrary decisions that somebody made about how to interface with a thing that you're not even trying to understand, right? But that knowledge became very popular since, let's say, since 2005. Once this second boom of programming happened and everybody realized, oh, you can make a lot of money in programming or whatever, all these people showed up and they just want the job where they could do JavaScript, and so they just learned the API, right?
Is that what people did when there started being this inkling that you could make money in software engineering? Did we all just go and watch JavaScript tutorials and go into the wild, get a job off of that YouTube JavaScript? Is that what people are putting on their CV? I watched a couple of JavaScript tutorials. I assume that it's still quite a competitive market. I don't think people are just getting into software engineering roles. I think for graduates and people with no experience, that's quite a large leap. And you need to show quite a lot of competency and capacity for problem solving. I don't think grinding YouTube tutorials is going to get you for an interview. I think they're going to suss you out pretty quick. And maybe, yes, from that perspective, there are a bunch of shallow software engineers who came up watching YouTube tutorials, but I imagine all of them are unemployed, or almost all of them.
Right, and so there's been a deluge of shallow knowledge. It's a little bit more complicated than that because part of the way that you learn deep knowledge is by looking at shallow things and reading the pattern underneath. Like, if there's an API to do something, if it's a good API, then by looking at the API choices, you can understand the problem and the mechanic. Even if you can't see the code, it's better if you could see the code inside. But if you can't, you can still see some things about the mechanics. And you know, one example of that is a graphics API. It's like, okay, they want me to like put the vertex data into a buffer and like lock the buffer and then not touch it. Why is that? Oh, it's going to the GPU and all this stuff, right? You can figure this out.
I'm still not too sure what he means by there being a problem with current software engineers not having this knowledge. I work in image processing, and we have exactly these patterns that he's talking about now. And the reason that I'm familiar with those patterns and can identify them is because I've worked with them. Not because I did a module on ILGPU processing at a university or whatever the point is he's trying to make here. What qualifies? Am I missing what he means by deep knowledge? Where do I attain deep knowledge if not on JavaScript tutorials on YouTube?
On the other hand, if it's a bad API, which most APIs are, it'll be full of stuff that's stupid.
And also, actually, to speak to the thing that he's saying about money, is that how people go about, say you are driven exclusively by money, are you going to go and just blindly start picking JavaScript frameworks and learning them so that you can get a job? Or are you going to go to the Stack Overflow yearly review and go, what's the highest pay thing that's high in demand? I'm just going to no life Rust or COBOL and go work for a fintech company. I don't think people go into JavaScript trying to blag their way into making loads of money.
And or even cargo culting, where they're copying a good API. So my favorite example of this was when Microsoft did Direct 2D, which was taking Direct 3D, which was successful, and then trying to add font rendering and all that to that. They made an ARGB color, right? So red, green, blue, and alpha, a lockable resource. So to create one of these, you had to like lock it and fill the color data and unlock it. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're doing. And I actually told Microsoft this, and they did not like my opinion on that. But they were just copying, oh, Direct 3D has you lock things and fill them, and so let's do that here. And it was completely absurd.
I kind of see the point that he's making of people following. I think one of the tenets of maturing as a software engineer is having the confidence that just because it's already done a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that it should continue to be done that way. You might be working on a piece of code and you git blame it and you see that it hasn't been touched in 3 years and it was written by a senior that is no longer at the company, and you think, oh god, you know, like that guy must have known what he was doing when he wrote this line of code, so I'm not going to touch it. And then a couple of days later you're banging your head against the wall and you realize that actually that was the piece of code that you needed to change. And I don't think that is exclusive to non-FAANG companies. I imagine Microsoft has similar problems, but I know this Jonathan Blow guy, if we look at his Wikipedia, he's worked on some pretty formidable titles. It's crazy to think that he worked on Oddworld as well. So maybe this guy was a step ahead of Microsoft. I don't know. I'm not going to judge. I'm going to take his word.
So how to fix it? There just isn't much of an idea right now.
This was what I was kind of hoping he'd get onto, but he's given a bunch of examples of what he doesn't like and backgrounds that he doesn't necessarily agree with, but I want to hear what he has to say about what he qualifies as good.
Of what an actual respectable engineer is, you know? Like if you think back to like civil engineering, like people who build bridges or whatever, you think of people who are responsible and know things well and make sure they're right because it's important to be right.
Yeah, I kind of get where he's coming from. You've just named another broad sweeping group of people. The same way that there are respectable software engineers and I guess what he would describe as software engineers with shallow knowledge, there will be exactly the same problems in that industry as well. I don't think that every civil engineer lives up to this extraordinary standard. And also, civil engineering doesn't have the same level of innovation and progress that software engineering has, right? The reason that these guys become the wise man that ends up, I don't know, a lot of civil engineers are promoted to CEO. And it's because kind of you can see everything in 20, 30 years of working, whereas I don't think that's true in software engineering. If you stop learning, give it a couple of years and you're out of date.
We don't really have that in software at all. It's completely dead as far as I can tell. And part of the reason it's dead is because nobody can tell what's right, because it's just a bunch of people arguing in a loud room. And
I bet this guy is fun to work with. I don't doubt that he's a very accomplished software engineer, but just that there, I think he's just revealed a little bit of himself. I don't think I can describe any of my interactions in my job as a bunch of people going, nah.
What's right, because it's just a bunch of people arguing in a loud room, and like no real information gets through. And if anybody has an idea how to solve that, I would love to hear that idea.
This is wild. What is he saying? I don't know, maybe you guys have stagnation in development because instead of working on what should be done, everybody's just arguing in a loud room. But I've never had that experience. If anything, it's quite reflective. If you're in Agile, you have your retrospective at the end of the week, where I feel like if anybody had batted down good ideas because people were getting argumentative, somebody would have mentioned it in that meeting, everybody would have reflected on it and thought, maybe we should not do that. I don't know. It sounds like he's been in some company cultures that are quite rotten and it's maybe tainted his view, or he struggles with defending himself in a group in a way that people actually engage and listen and want to learn from what he's saying.
Idea, I don't know. The only way that I know to solve it is to just do better in an obvious way. But even that maybe doesn't win, right? Because all these JavaScript frameworks are still popular, even though they're all the same as each other, right?
You have NPMs to pad things because no one wants to write code anymore.
And
I don't hate that. I mean, I can't really speak to JavaScript too much because JavaScript isn't one of the languages I've used. But say, for example, in the company I work in, we make most things bespoke. We're not importing pre-existing libraries. We typically make things from the ground up. Whereas if I'm working on personal projects, say I want to quickly get a proof of concept up, I'm going to use Python and I'm going to import a bunch of libraries that I have very shallow knowledge of to get the thing going. So I guess maybe what you're saying is that some JavaScript software engineers rely too heavily on pre-existing libraries, but also at the same time, if it gets the job done, time is a constraint as a software engineer. And as much as we'd all like to write perfect code from the ground up that's highly optimized, if it doesn't fit within your business's time constraints of when they need a product release, you've got to know when and where to opt for highly bespoke or pre-made solutions. So I'm not too sure how much I agree with what most of this guy's saying. Maybe software development in video games is quite different, but he did preface this conversation by saying this is what it's like in all of software engineering.
in the same way the market can remain irrational longer than you could remain solvent, I think software industry culture could remain stupid longer than you're alive. Like, that's just possible. So I'm doing what I can do, but
I just don't, but I get what he's saying, and I see his problem with industry in general, but it's a human industry, and I feel like if he went to any sector, he wouldn't find this magical group of people who are just the cream of the crop top people.
I'm very conscious that I have a limited ability to affect this giant thing.
This guy, I need to see what people are saying about this. Yeah, I mean, look at how it's made this guy feel. The more experience he gets, the more he feels like he doesn't know anything. There's that quote by Einstein, as your circle of knowledge grows, so does its circumference of darkness. It's true of any field. And like you say, it's even harder, and I kind of touched on this earlier, with an industry that evolves at the rate software engineering does, so I wouldn't get too caught up with this. This guy, I guess, agrees companies don't want experts, they want code monkeys. These guys interview leak coders, so they get leak coders, then cry about it. Deep knowledge isn't what got me the job, it's leak code. Is that true? Can you just grind a bunch of leak code questions and get a job? Because if so, if the problem is that leak code leads to shallow knowledge and therefore you end up with a bunch of software engineers with shallow knowledge, then surely the onus isn't on the software engineer, but instead the hiring system. Because it's competitive, right? Software engineering is competitive. So if you raise the bar for what gets you through an interview, people aren't just going to grind leak code questions. They're going to get this knowledge that the companies are defining as required. I wish someone had a deep enough understanding of audio technology so we wouldn't have to hear this guy breathing. I have to apologize. I guess there's nothing I can do about this guy just fully nasal breathing into his mic. Yeah, I like what this guy's saying. I think maybe we need to cut him some slack, because if he's this super technical software engineer, he's probably been hired in scenarios where this is the status quo. He's probably only taking jobs where, okay, let's take this known piece of code and optimize it to the point that it's perfect, right? He strikes me as that kind of person, and fundamentally that's just not what the entire industry looks like. Yeah, this guy. It's all about how fast you can get something out. I like this guy's kind of... Was I right about that quote? I was. As our circle of knowledge expands, so does the difference of darkness surrounding it. Yeah, this guy makes a point. It's because everything has guidelines in civil engineering and law that everyone must follow, but software is never-ending, evolving. I kind of touched on that. So if you want to take something away from this, I guess it's this point of people grinding leak code questions and having shallow tutorial-based knowledge. Those are at least the bits I agree with. I actually have a video that shows how, like I said, I came from construction and went into software engineering. I had no background, and I split up how my learning took me from never having written production level code to sprint ready in 3 months. So if you click this video here, I show you a breakdown of how much time I spent watching tutorials, how much time I spent doing projects, and what kind of projects you can pick up. And I can tell you now, I haven't ever done a single leak code question, so I don't know. Maybe there's something for me to learn now. I hope that video helps. Cheers.